We're going to have our very large United States oil companies, the biggest anywhere in the world, go in, spend billions of dollars, fix the badly broken infrastructure, the oil infrastructure, and start making money for the country.
President Trump expressing his vision for Venezuela's future now that Maduro is in U.S. custody. The president's comments stirring some more legal questions. To break all of this down, let's bring in former U.S. Deputy Assistant Attorney General John Yoo. Thank you very much, John, for being with us. I want to start out here. What defense might Maduro give, and is he likely to be convicted in your mind?
It's very interesting, Jackie, and great to be with you. Happy New Year. We can go back and look at the 1989 case of Manuel Noriega, which has a lot of parallels to today. President George H.W. Bush ordered a military invasion of Panama. We grabbed Noriega and brought him back for trial on the same exact charges, basically drug trafficking, being a member of a cartel. He was convicted. He ended up serving his sentence. But he did raise these novel defenses, which I'm sure Maduro is going to raise too, where they say, look, I'm not really a drug trafficker. I'm the head of state. You just went to war with my country, Panama then, Venezuela now. I have immunity from prosecution. I should just be treated like a prisoner of war under the Geneva Conventions, and I can't be tried. I have to say, back in the Noriega case, the federal courts rejected all of those claims. And they essentially said, you are entitled to the same rights as any other criminal defendant would be in federal court, but you don't get more rights than any normal criminal defendant in federal court. And let me add, those rights are generous. Maduro is going to have lawyers. He's going to have the right to put on a defense before a jury, very strict rules of evidence. He's going to get way more due process and fairness than he ever gave to those political prisoners that he threw in jail and murdered in his own country.
To your point, for Democrats like Senator Tim Kaine, for instance, who we just spoke to, who are, decrying this as an act of war without congressional approval, does it constitute an act of war? Because, granted, it's not often that executing an arrest warrant results in toppling a government, but at the same time, most of the Western world does not recognize Maduro as a legitimate head of state.
That's an excellent question, Jackie. And I got to say, I just think Senator Kaine was just flat wrong. And I question whether these critics of President Trump today are being principled, because presidents of both parties have done this for decades. I just mentioned 1989 President George H.W. Bush. President Clinton in Serbia waged an air war and ultimately led to the overthrow and trial of Slobodan Milosevic. Right? President Obama used force, and with Senator Kaine's running mate in the presidential election, Hillary Clinton, as Secretary of State at the time, used force to overthrow and kill the dictator in Libya, Muammar Gaddafi. So this is a tradition that's gone on for a long time. In all those cases, Congress was not required under the Constitution to give some kind of authorization. Look, if Senator Kaine and other members of Congress want to stop this, they have plenty of tools at their disposal. They can cut off funding immediately. That's how the Vietnam War ended. Or they could impeach a president that they think is waging a bad war. They're welcome to try that. I don't think they have the support in Congress. So it's easier for them to try to escape responsibility, but continue also to fund, I got to say, the amazing military, the only kind in the world that could carry out such a decisive and speedy operation like the one we saw 2 days ago.
We've got less than 2 minutes left, and I want to get to 2 other topics. So very quickly on the indictment. It was unsealed yesterday. Clearly demonstrates Maduro's a very bad guy. It discusses cocaine at length. It doesn't mention fentanyl. The administration has consistently linked its campaign against Venezuela, against Maduro, to the fentanyl crisis in the U.S. Does that matter at all legally?
No, because what matters is whether Maduro is part of a conspiracy, part of a cartel that is sending drugs into the United States that harm Americans. It doesn't have to be in particular fentanyl or cocaine if he's part of that cartel and conspiracy that is sending those kind of drugs and using violence to get them into the country.
And on the oil, the president has justified plans to sell the nation's oil, saying it was actually stolen from the U.S. when Venezuela nationalized its oil industry. The Wall Street Journal editorial board, which largely praised this operation, also said Mr. Trump talked about the oil far too much, which sends a message that the U.S. purpose is largely mercenary. Venezuela will benefit if U.S. oil companies modernize the country's decrepit oil production facilities, but the U.S. does not need Venezuelan oil. Would the president have been on firmer ground if he didn't go there yesterday?
I actually think I understand why he's mentioning it, because it shows that this is not some kind of war of aggression. I think Senator Kane's description of the Monroe Doctrine was completely off point, the idea that the U.S. is just intervening to prop up friendly regimes. What the United States is doing is protecting these South American countries from places like Russia, China, Iran, which are using their malign influence, and trying to actually respect the democratic wishes of the Venezuelan people as expressed in the last elections. And the use of oil is, just like we tried to do in Iraq, I think ultimately successfully, but at great cost, is we use the oil revenue legally to help rebuild the country, which Maduro and his regime won't do. Instead, they're looting the country. They're just taking what few oil revenues there are to line their own pockets.
So if the U.S. takes over, sort of running this operation, according to Politico, the White House has told companies that they must rebuild Venezuela's crude pumping infrastructure if they want compensation for assets seized by Caracas. These companies might not jump at the opportunity to invest in a country where they're not sure yet who's going to run it and if that investment would be safe. But does the U.S. need to guarantee their security for this to work? And moreover, do they need to open up the bidding process potentially to companies that are outside of America?
Jackie, you're asking really tough legal questions today. Those are really the one. They should be paying you big money at a law firm for this. These are the follow-on questions that the Trump administration is now going to have to work through, because you're right. In order for this to succeed, just like Iraq, I was in the Justice Department working on these same questions in 2003. Oil companies and investment and infrastructure companies are not going to come in unless there's a stable investment environment. And that means that the Trump administration is going to have to put more work, not just into the physical infrastructure, but building a democratic political regime there that's stable, has the rule of law. Only then will the companies be able to come in securely and know if they put in money, they're going to be able to get a reasonable turnaround on their investment, and their security of their employees and facilities are going to be protected.
We will see how it all unwinds. As the president says, we'll see what happens. All right, John Yoo, former U.S. Deputy Assistant Attorney General, thank you so much for joining us this morning on the Sunday Briefing, sir.
Hey, everyone. I'm Emily Compagno. Catch me and my co-hosts Harris Faulkner and Kaylee McEnany on Outnumbered every weekday at 12 p.m. Eastern, or set your DVR. Also, don't forget to subscribe to the Fox News YouTube page for daily highlights.